Most of the time, we don't notice the things that are right in front of us. We wake up, check the time, get ready, eat something, and continue with our day. Everything seems normal. But behind the ordinary things we see every day, there are stories that most people never stop to think about. A simple object on a table may have taken hundreds of years to become what it is today. An ordinary-looking tool may have changed the way people lived. And something we use every day may actually have a surprisingly long history. Most of the time, we only see the final version. We don't see the mistakes, experiments, and ideas that came before it. For example, let's think about something very simple: a chair. Today, chairs are everywhere. They are used in homes, schools, offices, restaurants, and many other places. We hardly ever think about them. But sitting down and resting comfortably was not always as easy as it is today. For thousands of years, people used stone, wooden benches, animal skins, and various simple surfaces to sit on. The first chairs were not designed for everyone. In some ancient societies, a chair was a symbol of power and status. Important people sat on decorated chairs while others stood or sat on the ground. Over time, chairs became more practical and more common. Designers began thinking about comfort. Different materials, heights, and shapes were tested. Eventually, the chair became an ordinary object that we almost never question anymore. And that is what makes it so interesting. The most successful inventions are often the inventions we no longer notice. The same thing is true for lighting. Before modern electricity, people depended on sunlight, fire, candles, and oil lamps. When the sun went down, darkness became an important part of everyday life. People had to organize their lives around daylight. Then technology slowly began to change everything. Different types of lamps appeared. Scientists experimented with electricity. Eventually, electric lighting became part of everyday life. Today, we hardly think about turning on a light when we enter a room. But imagine living in a world where light was not so easily available. A dark room would remain dark unless another source of light was brought in. We often forget this. Technology doesn't just change the things we have. It also changes our expectations. When something becomes a normal part of our lives, we begin to think that it has always been there. Think about communication. For most of human history, sending a message to someone far away was very slow. A letter could take days, weeks, or even longer to arrive. People had to rely on messengers, ships, horses, and roads. Then the telegraph appeared. Suddenly, information could be sent much faster. Then came the telephone, then radio, television, computers, and eventually smartphones and the internet. Today, a message can reach the other side of the world within seconds. We can communicate with someone thousands of kilometers away almost instantly. Because we experience this every day, it no longer feels extraordinary. But to people who lived just a few generations ago, this idea would have seemed almost impossible. Most of the time, we don't realize how extraordinary the life we consider normal actually is. Look around you. There are probably objects near you that would have seemed incredibly advanced to people living in the past. A simple clock tells you the time. A refrigerator keeps food cold. A washing machine cleans clothes. A small device can store thousands of photographs. And a phone can allow you to communicate with almost anyone. None of these things feels magical to us anymore. They are simply part of our everyday lives. But every one of them exists because someone encountered a problem and decided to find a better solution. This is usually how progress happens, not through one giant invention that changes everything at once, but through thousands of small improvements. One person comes up with an idea. Another person improves that idea. Someone else notices a problem. Another person finds a solution to that problem. And after years of development, we eventually get the product we know today. That's why history is not only about famous people and major events. History is also the history of the ordinary objects we use every day. The spoon, the shoe, the key, the bottle, the table, the clock, the pen, the door. All of these things have changed over time. Some changes were very significant. Others were so small that nobody noticed them. But all of these changes together shaped our everyday lives. For example, think about the pen. Writing has existed for thousands of years. Ancient civilizations used different materials and tools to record information. People wrote on stone, clay, papyrus, parchment, and paper. Writing tools changed again and again over time. Eventually, people developed tools that were easier to carry and easier to use. A modern pen may look simple, but behind that simplicity is a complex process of development. When an object works perfectly, we don't think about how difficult it was to design. That is one of the interesting things about good engineering. The better something works, the less we think about it. We simply use it. Another example is roads. A road may look like nothing more than a simple surface connecting two places. But roads changed human history. They allowed people to travel farther. They helped trade develop. They connected cities. They made it easier for armies to move. And they allowed ideas to spread from one place to another. Modern roads are the result of centuries of experimentation. Different materials were tested. Different designs were created. Drainage systems were improved. Bridges became stronger. Transportation became faster. Today, millions of people travel every day, and most people never think about how much history exists behind the roads beneath their feet. Most of the time, we see the result, not the journey. This idea applies to almost everything. When you look at a modern building, you see the finished structure. You don't see the engineers calculating its strength. You don't see the workers who built it. You don't see the transportation of the materials. You don't see the countless decisions that were made before the first wall appeared. The same is true for a book. You see the finished pages. But behind those pages, there may have been months or years of research, writing, editing, and correction. Music is the same. You hear the final song. You don't hear all the failed attempts that came before it. Inventions develop in the same way. We usually remember the final product. We forget the experiments. Perhaps this is one of the most important lessons we can learn from history. Progress rarely happens perfectly. People make mistakes. Ideas can fail. Plans can change. Something may not work. Then someone tries again. And sometimes, failure becomes the first step towards something better. That's why many of the objects around us look so simple today. Their complexity has been hidden by time. Each generation inherits the things developed by the generation before it. Then it adds something new. One small improvement leads to another improvement. And eventually, hundreds of small changes create something completely different. This process can take decades. Sometimes it can take centuries. And we may never know the names of the people who contributed to every step, but their work is still all around us. In the objects we use, in the buildings we enter, on the roads we travel, and in the technologies we depend on. Most of the time, history continues to live quietly inside the present. So the next time you pick up an ordinary object, stop for a moment. Look at it. Ask yourself, who first thought of this? Why was it created? What problem was it designed to solve? What did people use before it? How many times has it changed? You may discover that the most ordinary object has the most interesting story, because the world around us did not appear all at once. It was built piece by piece, idea by idea, generation by generation. And perhaps the most interesting part is this: the story is still continuing. The things we use today will not look the same in the future. Someone will improve them. Someone will replace them with something else. New technologies will appear. In years from now, people may look at the technologies we consider normal today and think, how did people live with this? Just as we look at old inventions and wonder how people lived without modern technology. Most of the time, we don't realize that we are living inside history while it is happening. We think history belongs to the past, but history is being written right now. Every new invention, every new idea, every small improvement, and every problem someone decides to solve. One day, the ordinary things around us today may become historical objects that people study. So don't underestimate ordinary things. A simple object can represent centuries of human creativity. A small invention can change the lives of millions of people. And a small improvement can eventually become something the entire world depends on. Because most of the time, the biggest changes begin with something very small. But there is another side to this story that is easy to forget. Sometimes, the most important changes are not the ones that attract the most attention. A new invention may become famous because it looks impressive. But a small improvement that saves people a few minutes every day can have an equally important impact. Imagine millions of people using the same simple tool every day. If that tool becomes slightly faster, easier, or safer, the effect can spread across entire communities. This is how small changes can become big changes. Think about the way we store information. In the past, information had to be written down by hand. Books had to be copied. Documents had to be stored carefully. If something was lost or destroyed, recovering it could be extremely difficult. Then printing technology made it possible to produce books much more efficiently. Later, computers changed the way information was stored. Today, enormous amounts of information can be stored digitally and accessed within seconds. The technology may look completely different, but the basic goal has remained the same. People have always wanted to preserve information and make it easier to share. The same pattern can be seen in transportation. People first walked, then they used animals. They developed carts and boats. Eventually came trains, cars, airplanes, and modern transportation systems. Each step solved a different problem. People wanted to travel farther. They wanted to travel faster. They wanted transportation to become safer and more reliable. And every generation continued improving what already existed. This tells us something important about human creativity. We don't always need to completely invent something new. Sometimes, the best idea is simply to take something that already exists and make it better. A better design, a stronger material, a simpler mechanism, a faster process, a safer method. These improvements may seem small when they happen, but after years of development, they can completely transform everyday life. And that's why we should pay attention to ordinary things. The objects around us are not just objects. They are the result of thousands of decisions made by people who lived before us. Someone asked a question. Someone noticed a problem. Someone tried something that didn't work. Someone tried again. And eventually, another person found a better way. We are surrounded by the results of those efforts every single day. And now, we are part of that same process. The things we improve today may become the starting point for someone else's invention tomorrow. So the next time you see something ordinary, don't just ask what it is. Ask how it became what it is. Because behind almost every simple object, there is a journey. And sometimes that journey is far more interesting than the object itself. Most of the time, we see the finished world. But behind that world are centuries of ideas, mistakes, discoveries, and improvements.